Hello there, and welcome back to my channel. As you have seen from the intro, this video is going to be about the Nikon Df. It is a video I've been thinking about making for quite some time now. I had the Df since 2015 or so, but it caught my eye already at the time it was introduced in 2013. Bearing a resemblance to some of the older Nikon bodies from the film era, I was curious right away, since I always enjoyed shooting film back in the day. The digital bodies that had come out over the years, while being great in a technical way, left a lot to be desired when it came to the aesthetics and feel of the camera. And the trend seemed to be to pack as much features into an increasingly heavy camera body instead. So seeing the Df suddenly arrive at the market was very pleasing. But at that time, it was not very well accepted by the photography community. And while being praised by few, it was very misunderstood and actually hated by many, as something of a Frankenstein's monster. But before diving deeper into my personal journey together with the Df, and before giving my opinion based on the years using the Df, let's get some of those technical specifications out of the way. The Nikon Df was designed by a man called Tetsuro Goto. And it was the same man that designed the legendary Nikon F3, F4 and F5, the old film bodies. Under the hood we can see that the Df shares the same sensor as the Nikon D4. It's a 60 megapixel full-frame CMOS sensor. The AF system in the Df is the same as the one in the Nikon D610. It's a 39-point AF system. And you get the ability to use 3D metering as well. The Df, while not being an action camera, can actually shoot 5.5 frames per second in the continuous shooting mode. And if it's not obvious by now, it has no video. It has a single SD card slot, and the battery that comes with the Nikon Df is good for around 1400 exposures, Nikon says. I'd say that's pretty accurate, but I'm not completely certain. So one of the big reasons to like using the Df is of course the analog feeling of the camera. And that comes with the same sort of tactile dials, levers and wheels that you had on the old camera bodies back in the days. And as you can see here on the left side of the Df, you got a sort of dual purpose wheel with a smaller wheel on top that you use to change your exposure compensation. And then just underneath that you have a bigger wheel that you actually change your ISO settings. It's very practical. I like that a lot on this camera. And then of course switching to the other side, for the Df you can see that you have several wheels and dials here as well. So you get one smaller dial there to the right where you change your shooting settings between manual and aperture priority and so on. And then the shutter button, of course, and then also a larger dial to change your shutter speeds. And there is also a dual purpose function there as well, like on the other side, where you actually change your shooting speeds with the frames per second, increasing or decreasing. And also down in the right corner there on top, you have a little cool display. And to the right side of that you actually have a little button to help you in dark places that will switch on a little light to help you see the numbers and everything clearly in the display there. And then we continue backside down here on the camera. Just below there are two dedicated buttons, one for AF lock, an A lock button, and then to the right a very helpful AF on that I use a lot on my Df. And on the right side of that you got the aperture wheel that you change your aperture setting. if you don't want to use the dedicated aperture wheel on the lens itself, of course. And if we continue downwards just below that, we got a little dedicated wheel for the metering of the camera. So you get first the center weighted metering, and then you got the matrix metering, and then you got the spot metering to the right of those. And also to the largest command wheel there, which is of course the one where you change the locations of your AF point, for example, or change your settings in your menus and all that sort of stuff. And also a lock button for that wheel, so you don't change anything by mistake, for example. And here the dedicated button for the AF settings. You get your autofocus to the left and your manual to the right. So a lot going on here on the back side of the DF. I'm gonna try to make sense of it. In the middle, of course, you have your menu where you will change all your settings and customize the different command dials and settings for those. To the left of the display, you get a white balance button, a quality button, and a zoom in, zoom out button, which are very handy when you just take an image with a DF when you want to zoom in or zoom out. And to the right side of the display, you get a live view button and also an info button. I'll just say about the menu as well that it's pretty cluttered, and I usually try to avoid going to the menu as much as possible, but it's pretty much like any Nikon digital camera menu, and you will feel right at home if you've used one before. So on the bottom here, you got the very infamous battery door of the DF, which I will go into a little bit deeper later on in the pros and cons section. But here is where you put a battery and also your dedicated SD card here in the same compartment as the battery. And there is also the EN-EL14A battery we spoke about earlier. So now it's time for me to get a bit more personal about this camera. First of all, if it's not obvious by now, I really like this camera, despite all of its shortcomings. I was looking for a replacement for my beloved D700 at the time, and when looking at other options, I couldn't really find anything that satisfied me. So I went through some old reviews about the DF, and reading through them I realized something I hadn't realized reading them way back in 2013 when the DF was introduced. And that was that most of those shortcomings that they were listing in those reviews never really applied to me, at least not now. First of all, I did not need any video at all. And I loved all those dials and controls that everyone thought crowded the DF, the camera body. I did not have huge hands, which apparently for many people was a problem, because the DF felt too small in their hands, and that the grip was too small. And if I ever felt that the DF lacked in the autofocus department, I had a Nikon D810 and later on a D4 if I ever felt I needed to shoot something faster. So the slower AF of the DF didn't really bother me either. And I already know from before reading up on the D4 that the sensor that was the same in the DF was one of the best ever made. And I really liked the images coming out of the D4. I think the colors and skin tones and everything in portraits made me believe and feel quite safe that choosing the DF I would have a camera with a sensor that I really liked. And those 16 megapixels, even though by today's standards would be something of a laughing matter, for me, honestly it felt more like a blessing. I hated handling bigger files, and the resolution was more than enough to print anything I needed or wanted. Here you can see the DF in good company with some of my favorite Nikon film cameras. Which brings me to probably the biggest reason why I like the DF so much. For a digital camera, it has so much in common with those older cameras. The dials and the design and the layout of the camera. And it even shares some of the same lenses. It's such a joy to be able to bring the DF and a Nikon film camera and just swap lenses between them. And it's just an amazing feeling to be able to experience that character from those older lenses on a digital camera. as you can see, it's about the same size as the Nikon F100, and actually not much bigger than either the FN3A or the FE2 cameras. And that is also another reason for me it makes for a perfect travel companion. It fits right in between those larger, bulky digital cameras and the newer mirrorless digital cameras. And the ability to use the older AIS lenses makes it a pretty compact and not too heavy package. Just before I show you some of the pictures that I've taken with the DF and the lenses I like to use with the DF, I'm just briefly gonna touch on each lens that's been the favorite to use together with the DF over the years. The first one out here was the Nikon 24mm f1.4 ED lens. One of the best wide-angle lenses I have ever used. Great character and very versatile lens. The next one, the Nikon 105mm f1.4 ED lens, was a dream lens for me. And it's probably the best portrait lens I have ever used on a digital camera, ever. And the third lens here was the Nikon 58mm f1.4 G lens, or the Nikon Noct 2.0 as some people refer to it. It has something of the same character as the 105mm Nikon lens, and you can create the same kind of creamy background with it as well. A bit more versatile though, and one of my very personal favorite lenses to use on the DF. Finally, some closing words about my opinions on the DF. It's a polarizing camera. For its detractors, the cluttered layout, the small grip, the no video, and the slow AF, and the flimsy battery door are major drawbacks to a camera that tried to be something more than it was. But for myself and some other very devoted followers, it's unique, it's inspiring, it's the smallest DSLR, it's fun, it's engaging, and maybe most important of all, it will help you in your quest to create some magical photographs. And in the end, that is all that counts.